So, welcome to Bitcoin Bytes. Today is the 12th of April 2021, and the current price of Bitcoin is 50,400 euros. And as you're probably aware, Bitcoin has been bouncing up between 48, 51, 48, 49, 48,000 euros over the last couple of weeks. Indeed, it's probably been going on for the bones of a month. All the on-chain metrics and all the people in the know seem to think that Bitcoin is going to absolutely burst upwards, thankfully, in the next couple of weeks. And hopefully by maybe October, it will be in the region of about 100,000 euros. There's no surprise there. Bitcoin has been doing its thing for the past 10, 12 years. It's on a consistently upward march. And I think by the end of this year, we're going to be seeing multiples of its current price. I think probably we're in the region of maybe 180 to 200,000 by the time this bull run is done. So that's good news overall. Just some more news before we actually kick off this podcast. I would like to announce that I've started a new Telegram group, which is Bitcoin Bytes Podcast, and also a new YouTube channel. And on both these platforms, you can probably find my new show maybe a couple of hours after it's actually gone live. So if you'd like to catch up with me there, feel free to do so. So my news for this week is that I have migrated from my node. I've been using my node for 12, maybe 18 months now at this stage. I use it a couple of times a week. It's something that I connect my wallet to and I verify all my transactions through it. I also do some on-chain research using this node. I've had misgivings about it for quite a while. Nothing nefarious or anything like that. It's some of the applications that I would like to get working with it are paid only. I'm really not going to pay for these apps as I'm using them from testing. I'm not too sure if paying for them is actually the best course of option for myself. So in that light, I had done a bit of research. I had tried to figure out, was there another way of actually getting these applications along with a full Bitcoin node in place at home on hardware that I host. It's something that I've done quite a bit of research on, and it was actually an article that popped up in one of my feeds that maybe I should check out. Umbrel. So it's Umbrel. I think their Twitter handle is GetUmbrel, and I can see why, because any of the reviews that I read on it are from users, obviously enough, and they were raving reviews. They get great reviews everywhere. So I was intrigued to check out that piece of software. So I downloaded it. I've installed it on a Linux box. I've kind of gone in the secondary mode of how they would recommend you do it, but it works for me. I'm quite happy. The interface is very, very clean. The responsiveness of the node is very, very quick. It's very slick. It has a lot of the features that I was getting from my node, which would have been like Lightning support. I would have had the BTC Explorer. I could sync wallets to it. It has all of that as standard, but it also has mempool, which is quite handy for checking fees on the network. And it also has BTC Pay Server. Now, I'll talk about BTC Pay Server in a short little bit. But these two apps themselves were paid for with MyNode. I think MyNode charges, I think it's at 100 euros a year. If I'm incorrect, please do correct me. But my understanding is that they do charge 100 euros for these apps. And I'm getting those with Umbrel free of charge. It's an app that you download, you add it to the main program, and it works fantastically. I have already set up on the Bitcoin Bytes website. I'm in the process of setting up the store, but I've already linked the BTC Pay Server back to my own hardware wallet, and it is accepting payments. So that's fantastic news. So in that vein, I wanted to discuss nodes on this program. I wanted to go into what are Bitcoin nodes, what it is, why you would run one, and where and how you get the resources to actually run a node. So I think that's what we're going to spend a bit of time talking about today. By the end of the episode, I will also have discussed BTC Pay Server, because I think that's an incredibly powerful piece of software. And again, it's 100% free with Umbrel. Now, before I go too far into this, I'm not being sponsored by Umbrel. I have no association, no affiliation with Umbrel. I don't get paid to recommend their products. This is something that I've taken in on my own bat. I've used it on my own hardware. I find it good, and I think you might find it good too if nodes are something that you would like to run yourself. So if we get into what is a Bitcoin node, first of all, we need to discuss how Bitcoin works. So there's a couple of things to understand with Bitcoin, and we did go through some of it in our last podcast, but basically Bitcoin is a ledger-based technology. So what it does is it wants to replace the current fiat currency systems by in effect having a trustless model where I don't have to trust you, you don't have to trust me, and if we're both running nodes, we can both verify that that transaction has taken place, and not only that it has taken place, but we are following the Bitcoin network rules, and that's majorly important. Now, there are two types of Bitcoin node. There's a mining node, and there's also a validation node. And with the validation nodes, there's two different types. Again, there's an archival, and then there's called a prune node. An archival node is also known as a full node. So it has a full copy of the blockchain. That means from the very first transaction that was enacted on the Bitcoin network right up to the very last, it's all contained within an archival node. A prune node or a partial node might have maybe the last 20 gigabytes of data that's on the blockchain. It could be 2 gigabytes of data, it could be 150 gigabytes, but it doesn't have the full copy of the blockchain. And there's many reasons for this. The archival node would take maybe 350, maybe 375 gigabytes of data, and some people mightn't be in a position to pull that amount of data down and store it on their node. They might have a bad broadband connection, as in it's not very fast, or they might have limitations on the amount of data they can pull down. So they can use a pruned node, which maybe will say they download 10 gigabytes of data off the blockchain, and they can validate their transactions using that. A mining node is a validation node in essence. It's the only node that's actually capable of creating Bitcoin. An archival node, or as we discussed, a pruned archival node, is not capable of creating Bitcoin. So the role of a mining node on the network is to basically guess the combinations which are needed to close the blocks of transactions, and by closing these blocks it then confirms them, and once the confirmation is in place, new Bitcoin are produced on the network. Now, a mining node is in essence validating that the transactions within each block conform to the rules of the network. So in essence it is a validation node. However, as I've said, it's the only one that's capable of producing new Bitcoin. It also has a very special role on the network where it passes the information along to other nodes after it has it has sealed the block or closed the block. Once this information has been passed out to the network in general, the archival nodes or the pruned nodes will actually confirm that that confirmation is valid. So they don't trust that the mining node has done its job correctly. They actually verify, and this is very important. There's verification at every step. So the full node or the archival node will take this piece of information once it's verified, and it will add it to the blockchain that it holds. And each full node across the network will independently verify that this block is correct, it's sealed correct, all the transactions are correct, and it'll store that block on its own copy of the blockchain. One of the major differences between the two types of node, so that would be the full node and the mining node, is the energy consumption. The mining node is required to have an awful lot of computing horsepower because it needs to process cryptographic hashes as quickly as possible so it can find the, inverted commas here, the solution to the block so it can close out that block. And to close out these blocks, these mining nodes require extremely high levels of power, and it's not something that your regular user or a person who's just dabbling in Bitcoin would set up at home. It's not practical. So The nodes that most people would run at home are the full node or a pruned node, as we spoke about earlier. A full node, as I said, would require a download initially of the full blockchain, which is probably in the region of 350 gigabytes. And once that download has completed, a steady trickle of data is really all that you require after that. Your broadband is not going to be maxed out running an archival node or a full node. A full node would be of benefit to most users as you can connect your Bitcoin wallet directly to it. So it gives you an element or a level of privacy. So instead of connecting your wallet directly to another company's full node, you will connect to your own, and then you can query your own transactions at that stage. Querying transactions through another company's full node gives them access to the actual address, the Bitcoin address that you're querying. So in essence, they can tie your IP address to that connection. This can be used for nefarious purposes. It generally isn't, but it can be. And if you're in any doubt that you want to link your address, your IP address that is, to your Bitcoin addresses, a full node is the way to go. So how would you set up a full node? The easiest way is just to go to Umbrel. You can download an ISO file, whether it's a Raspberry Pi ISO file or it's a Linux ISO. For those that don't know, a Raspberry Pi is a mini computer. It's limited in its hardware spec. It's quite versatile, however. You can download an ISO directly from Umbrel, flash it onto a micro SSD, install that in the Raspberry Pi, and then start the Raspberry Pi, and that will load the software directly from the micro SSD. It will ask you to install it. You can install the Bitcoin node, and then it will start to sync. It will make connections out to the Bitcoin network, and it will start to sync the blockchain back to your Raspberry Pi. In my case, what I've done is I have set up a Linux desktop. I have installed the environmental programs that are needed for Umbrel to run on the Linux operating system. I've then downloaded the ISO from Umbrel themselves, and I've run a script, which is basically just a couple of lines of code, and it has installed Umbrel, started, made the same connections that the Raspberry Pi has made to the Bitcoin network, and then it begins to sync the blockchain back down onto my machine. So the benefits, as I've said before, are that there's quite a healthy ecosystem within Umbrel itself. You can install apps. There's quite a few that are available at the minute. Just to run through a few, there are quite a few apps at the minute, I think 4, that deal with Lightning node management. So they would be Ride the Lightning, Lightning Terminal, Thunder Hub, and LN Bits, which is it's a multi-user wallet management system. There's also 2 types of explorers. So there's Mempool, which is a visualizer and an explorer, and then there's a database-free blockchain explorer called BTC RPC Explorer. There's also a number of wallets, so you can use Samurai Wallet, which is it's a very popular one. Then there's Spectre Desktop. As I mentioned earlier, there's BTC Pay Server, which is used for website payments or point of sale payments, and then there's also a messaging app called Sphinx Relay. So as you can see, there's quite a varied ecosystem around the Umbrel node currently. It's probably a bigger ecosystem than I've seen with any other type of node or any other type of node software that's out there. As I said before, I've used quite a few of them over the years. Umbrel is very easy to set up. There's not a lot of hassle. It works with an awful lot of hardware. It's not tied to any specific piece of hardware, and all the apps, while they're fully functioning, they're free, and they actually do 90% of, probably more, they probably do closer to 99% of what every Bitcoin user would want on a node. It's a fantastic piece of software, and even if you don't set up a node, I encourage you to take a look. It might just actually encourage you into setting up your own node on your own network at home. So now that we've gone through what nodes are, how they're important to the Bitcoin network, and quickly how to set one up in the easiest fashion, we're going to discuss why you would want to set up a node. So I can only talk about why I set one up, and it really kind of goes back to the whole idea of Bitcoin making the individual sovereign. So what I mean by that is, if someone is sovereign, they have control over their own money and their choices with money, how they spend their money, who they spend their money with, without being interfered by a third party. And Bitcoin does that very, very well. If I was to send a payment from myself to charity out in Africa, for example, if I was to send that through a bank, there's a good chance that the fees would be quite high, and also that the payment could possibly be blocked. And unfortunately, in those cases, I have no workaround. I have no choice of where my money goes. Well, on the Bitcoin network, if you run your own node, you validate your own transactions, you have your own gateway to the Bitcoin network, you can broadcast your transactions without a third party interfering with them. A Bitcoin node also offers privacy. So if I want to check on an incoming payment that's been sent from a person to myself, I can query my own node. I can check that the payment has been received, that it's a valid transaction, that the transaction has been confirmed by multiple parties, usually 6 or more. And once that transaction has been verified and validated on the network, I can, with high confidence, say that that transaction is within the network rules. You can also run a node to check on the state of the network. There's quite a number of tools out there, such as the mempool or the BTC Explorer, that you can trace transactions. You can see where a transaction originated from. It gives you an insight into the network to see who's buying, who's selling, the amount of Bitcoin that are being processed daily. It just gives you an overview of what's going on the network. The last reason I would mention for running a node is securing the network. So Bitcoin is growing, and it's growing exponentially in price, but the number of nodes that are currently being run to verify the network haven't been growing at the same rate. So if we believe in the Bitcoin network and we believe in the Bitcoin protocol, why not run a full node? The more nodes that are verifying the transactions, the stronger the network becomes overall. So there are just a few reasons why you would want to run a Bitcoin node. I'm quite aware it's not for everybody, but if you've any sort of interest on the back end of Bitcoin and the infrastructure around it, it's well worth doing just to set one up, just to learn the ins and outs, how the blockchain works, how your transactions are constructed, how the fees work. And as I said, with the mempool and the BTC RPC Explorer, you get a better visualization of what's actually going on at the network. So as I said earlier, I'd like to talk about BTC Pay Server. Now, while I'm not going to go into it really in-depth tutorial on how BTC Pay Server works, I just want to give a quick overview. As I've said before, I think it's a very, very powerful piece of software. So what is BTC Pay Server? Well, it's a payment processing piece of software. So think of it along the lines of PayPal or Revolut or something in along those lines. BTC Pay Server allows you to accept Bitcoin payments directly into your wallet. And that's a payment from your customer, if that's how you're set up, directly to yourself without a third party taking a fee, blocking the payment, or having any sort of interference with how you run your business. So if you think about setting up a website, maybe you're selling t-shirts or pins, or you're selling some sort of product, you need to set up an account with a payment processor, and that payment processor will charge you a monthly fee or a fee per transaction to actually process the payments on your website. And what BTC Pay Server actually does is it will integrate with your Bitcoin node, and it will allow you to add a plugin to your web commerce store, which you can then accept payments through. It connects to your Bitcoin node, the transaction gets validated, and the Bitcoin gets deposited directly to either your online wallet or also a cold storage wallet, just for more security. So when you think about what it is actually giving you, it is giving you a direct channel to your customers for direct payments. If we look at the Visa network, for example, they offer a similar service, but they charge you per transaction. And if the customer decides that they want their money back at any stage, Visa will pull that payment from your account. So you will not get paid for it. When we look at a BTC Pay Server, that payment is final. So with any dispute, you have more protection that the products you are selling will be returned before you return the payment to the customer. So why do I think BTC Pay Server is so powerful? Well, it removes the need for bank accounts. It removes the need for business bank accounts. It makes web commerce, which was the promise of Web 2.0 way back in the day, that everybody would have access to trade online, to create a living online, to create communities online, to kind of fundraise for common causes online. Because if we think about if we were doing crowdsourcing, again, that's a centralized platform where one company decides who can market their idea or their group or their vision online, and who can actually apply to their community for funding. While BTC Pay Server opens up the possibilities that you can set up a group yourself or a community yourself and fundraise from within that community to create a product or to buy some piece of land, maybe to plant trees or whatever your vision is. It really democratizes the internet again, where if anybody can send payments to anybody, anybody can trade online, anybody can sell a product online, anybody can sell subscriptions online, anybody can create services online, and they can be paid directly into a wallet that they host. That no bank can stop transactions, no bank can say, well, actually, we're not going to give you a bank account, or we're not going to give you some credit service. It really democratizes the internet again, and that's why I think this BTC Pay Server software is so powerful. So if we actually dig into it, it's actually open source software, which makes it even better. This source code is available to look at. If you know coding or you know somebody who knows coding, you can have them review it, check it out. It can be modified for any purpose. If you don't like how it appears on your website, you can modify the code so it appears like it's actually built into your website. It allows easy migration of the merchant's code base onto your own self-hosted payment processor. It enables the full benefits of having a full node where you can actually check your transactions back and forth to make sure that the transactions that are coming into you are 100% verified. It's trustless again because you're doing the validation yourself. You have control over the uptime of your server because you're running all your payment processing through your own server, which means again it's very, very private. BTC Pay Server, if a website is something that you're looking at deploying and you're wondering about how you're going to manage the payments, there are other options out there like Stripe, PayPal, which I don't recommend under any circumstances because they have a tendency to freeze payments no matter who they come from or who they're going to, no matter how long you've been in business with them. BTC Pay Server is definitely something that you'd want to look at. So, as I said, I'm not going to get too in-depth into it. What I am going to do is I'm going to leave a lot of links to where you can download it, where you can test it out, some reviews, some guides, just to walk you through and so you can get your head around actually how it works, how it might work for you, the benefits and some of the cons that are there as well. That brings us to the end of the podcast about nodes. I hope you found some value in this. As always, I'd encourage you to do your own research and find a solution that works for you. Again, I'd like to remind you about my new Telegram group. It's called the Bitcoin Bytes Podcast, and also the new YouTube channel where this podcast can also be listened to. It's the Bitcoin Bytes Podcast on YouTube. So thanks for your time, and we'll talk to you again next week.